people feel not seen and not heard, or like there's just not enough time given to clearly understand these complex systems that we are. And I always just think, like, for my patients, if I were them, what kind of care would I want? And I think that if we just provide the kind of care, I guess it's our version of the golden rule, but if we provide the kind of care that we would want for ourselves, then we would be doing good work.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. Have you had this happen? Ask a patient if they use lotion on their skin because you're trying to determine if they have naturally moist skin or not. And they reply, I should moisturize more often. The question was not a criticism. It was an inquiry. And yet, this is how it gets processed. Or you ask to look at their tongue, and then they ask you, how bad is it, doc? Truth be told, amongst ourselves, we will discuss how a patient is terrible because of the coating or the purple-red stagnation that is on their tongue. It's ridiculously easy to assign a judgment. Not at all difficult to go down a path of good and bad, and as practitioners, we pride ourselves on staying on the side of the upright in service of our patients. Maybe I'm just weary of crusading. These days, I'm less likely to put a value on a thick, greasy tongue coating or a habit a patient has that brings them comfort and trouble. For sure, I'm aiming at them feeling better, but I've lost the fight that I used to have in terms of feeling like I'm there to battle on their behalf. For sure, it can feel good to the practitioner to heroically remove a patient's suffering. I'm not arguing against this. Just that with the passage of time, I feel like I've gone from hired gun to gardener. I'm less judgmental of my patients, less trying to get them on the right road. I've retired the desire to educate them into better health. Instead, I'm curious about that thick tongue coating on their bright red tongue. Lately, I've been puzzling through the difference between judgment and discernment, working on having a neutral stance toward what I find in my diagnostic evaluation of a patient. I'm aiming at a stance of curiosity when meeting patients who have very different value systems than mine. And when I find myself complaining about a patient's behavior or personality trait, it usually means that I'm failing to find some key connection they have to themselves and their ailment that I'm missing. Patients have a list of good and bad for themselves. We have our lists for them as well. But on a good day, instead of saying to a patient, it's clear that eating that dairy is bad for your digestion, I strive for something more like, you must really love that dairy if you're willing to tolerate what it does to you. Our patients are already harsh on themselves in ways that we probably don't even notice. Sometimes, giving them the opportunity to simply be seen is enough to catalyze a process of change. The reason I'd like to better understand if a patient's skin is naturally moist or not is because I want to better understand their Tai-Yin-Yang-Ming fluid dynamic. The skin is a reliable indicator about that. The skin has a story to tell if you know how to read it. In this conversation with Fang Cai, we discussed the use of acupuncture to treat dermatological conditions. Yeah, I know. Usually we think of herbs as being the way to get at resolving stubborn skin conditions. But Fang, who has extensively studied Chinese medicine dermatology, has found that Saam acupuncture can be quite helpful in treating these kinds of difficult conditions. I always enjoy a conversation that makes me rethink what I consider to be possible. Ready to expand your mind? We'll be back right after a few words from the folks who make it possible for you to enjoy Geological. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. You have clinic challenges? Our sponsors have solutions. It's hip to be square with the game-changing Fascia Buddy cupping system that your patients are going to love. One of the foundations of a smooth-running clinic is having a supplier that you can rely on. Blue Poppy is your trusted source for all your clinic supply needs. Listen in for their special Black Friday discount. Mayway focuses this month on digestive health. Visit them not just for herbs, but also for learning resources that help you to better use real Chinese medicine. Later in the show, you'll hear how Jane's suite of clinic management tools makes office management a breeze. And for those of you licensed in California who want to get on insurance rolls with the best reimbursements and the least hassles, we have a special message from AcuCare, who has been helping acupuncturists do exactly that for over 30 years. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers that our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast.
The square cupping revolution has begun. Hi again, John Stan here, developer of the multi-sized Fascia Buddy square cupping system. We've been demonstrating the square cup system at conferences across North America and Europe, meeting wide-eyed practitioners excited by what the square cups can do. Our short, on-the-spot treatments have produced quick fascial remodeling, resulting in increased range of motion, less pain, and better function. Circular cups will always have a place, but the new techniques made possible with Fascia Buddy square cups will expand what you can accomplish, helping you love cupping even more. Fascia Buddy products are now available in the US through Golden Needle, Blue Poppy, and Omni Therapy Supply, in Canada at Eastern Currents, in the EU at acupunctureworld.com, and in New Zealand at Kinetic Distributions. Visit fasciabuddy.com to see links to our distributors and get your set today.
Running a busy clinic means staying stocked with the products you trust, and this November, Blue Poppy is making it easier than ever. From November 17th through the 30th, take 20% off your favorite Blue Poppy products during their Black Friday sale. That includes everything from their premium acupuncture needle brands, Tempo and Balance, to trusted herbal formulas like the Classics line, Great Nature Classics Cold Quell, Pediatrics Externals, and many more. It's the perfect time to stock up before the year ends, and with free shipping on all orders over $50 in the continental United States, there's even more to love. Don't miss this limited offer, 20% off Blue Poppy products, November 17th through the 30th.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lau, president of Mayway Herbs. This month at Mayway, we're focused on digestive health, a core foundation of wellness in Chinese medicine. In our newsletter and on our Chinese Medicine Matters podcast, we'll explore formulas and treatment for constipation, IBS, and food stagnation, offering both classical TCM insights and practical clinical applications. Since 1969, Mayway Herbs has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. Our Plumflower brand line includes pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs. And with educational resources, articles, and videos, we're here to help you provide the very best patient care. Visit us at mayway.com to explore more. We wish you a wonderful holiday season, and deep thanks, as always, for your support. Here's to better health and balance with the wisdom of real Chinese medicine.
Fang Cai, welcome to Qiological.
Thank you very much, Michael Max. Your voice is one that I hear in my head often when I'm gardening, so it's nice to be talking to you IRL over the computer.
It's funny. On occasion, I'll go to a conference or something or a class, and people come across the room and they go, "Are you Michael Max?" Because they've heard the voice. It's such a strange thing.
I guess so. I mean, it doesn't feel strange anymore. You know, your voice feels quite familiar to me because I listen to a few of my go-to podcasts when I garden.
What are the other ones? What do you like to listen to?
Well, I listen to, a lot of sort of medicine adjacent podcasts. So Qiological, I listen to Peter Attia's The Drive, the Huberman podcast.
Huberman. Oh my God. I love it.
Yeah, you got to pick the right geeky episodes that are interesting. I mean, yours is pretty geeky too, for certain Chinese medicine geeks. Yeah. I listen to some Chris Kresser, and those are the sort of educational ones, and then there are some other fun ones that I listen to.
What do you listen to for fun?
Well, I love Julia Louis-Dreyfus's Wiser Than Me. She interviews women who are older than her. It's fantastic. And then the latest one that I've been listening to for fun is the telepathy tapes, which is
Oh my goodness. What is up with the telepathy tapes? It's all over the place.
it is all over the place. Yeah. So, I think for people who are like, I don't know, open to having their minds and hearts expanded, it's a pretty cool story.
Yeah. What an amazing time we live in that we have access to phenomenal conversations that we otherwise wouldn't. I mean, how do you get invited into a room with Huberman or Julia Dreyfus interviewing women older than herself? What a great take on things.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm sure there's a lot of junk out there, but finding good podcasts is really and interesting. It's fun.
It is fun.
Yeah. And on this podcast, I've just learned about so many different things related to Chinese medicine that I never would have even thought that I would be interested in or never would have heard about.
What?
Well, like your latest one, I never remember names, so sorry for the people who were on, but about the scriptures that were found in Dunhuang.
Right.
That's probably not the latest one. I mean, so interesting how, the sort of worldwide spread of these Chinese medicine ideas, right? The Jing of the
Yes.
canons.
Yes.
Yeah.
They truly are Jing.
Yeah. So there's been lots. I mean, I'm not going to list your podcasts for
Yeah,
you.
no, you didn't need to do that. I'm just always a little curious. And yeah, that one on the Wuzhang Lun, it's so phenomenal how these different ideas about medicine have, over time, they've gone all around the world. It truly is a world medicine right now. It's not just East Asian.
Yeah, and then there was another episode that maybe it was the president of Yosan, I'm not sure, but someone had described, like someone was talking about the different factions of Chinese medicine and how really they thought, what we're practicing is acupuncture in America, or they had a different term for it, but we're just part of the river of the heterogeneous, all these branches, all these different ways of thinking about it, and we're contributing and expanding that river.
Yeah, it's impossible not to engage it and practice it without also contributing in whatever unique way we do, because it has to come alive in us in some way or fashion, or we wouldn't be able to do the work in clinic.
Yeah. And it was through your podcast that I first learned about Saam acupuncture, where I'm sure I had heard an episode with Toby or someone talking about it. I don't remember. And then I think at the same time, one of my other mentors, Sharon Weizenbaum, had studied with Toby daily and had talked about it. So I was like, well, this is kind of cool. And I went and read a couple of articles that Toby had written. And, you read all these different things just out of curiosity and wanting to learn. And some things resonate and some things, like, I'll never remember most of the stuff that I've read about Chinese medicine, right? But certain things stick out. And that one stuck out.
That one caught for you. What was it about Saam, if you can remember, that first got your attention? And then a follow-up to that is, and how has that changed your practice?
Well, I don't remember if it was from the podcast or the article, but it was just the very clear manipulation of the 5 phases and the 6 Jing that I was like, wow, you can do that with acupuncture? I feel like I hadn't, up until that point, really felt like I could manipulate those things very directly with acupuncture, and to like actually heat someone up or cool someone down just with needles. I mean, I practice herbs, so for me that was always the area that I would work on with herbs. And then to hear about being able to do that with acupuncture, that I think that's what really caught my attention first. And at that point, I mean, I know I took Toby's class first when things went online, like in summer of 2020. So that must have been 2019 or 2018 when I first started to think about Saam. Yeah, that was it. And then, reading his articles, and it just felt like there was something in there that was interesting and it had resonance.
Yes, and then you just follow it. I mean, I think a lot of us, regardless of what flavor of acupuncture we practice, there is something that gets our attention. It's kind of a glimmer from the edge in a way. Like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Huh, that looks interesting, right? It always starts off as something small, right? There's a little thing. It's like, huh, I want to know more about that. And then the next thing you know, it's a whole different universe.
Right. Yeah. And I remember even maybe reading the first or second article by Toby. And I specifically remember the case study in that article, like, wasn't even all that impressive. I mean, sorry, Toby, but it was, the case study was like with this maybe a Native American man who had a gambling addiction. And Toby treated him for like a long period of time, to deal with resources. And, having heard Toby's other case studies since then, I'm like, why'd you write about that, Toby? Like, that's such a weird, rambling case study for an article. So, but even with that, the journal paper was like really, it was so interesting. I wanted to learn more, beyond treating gambling addictions over a long period of time.
Yes. Gambling addiction and anger, as I recall. He's a gallbladder excess guy. Yeah, I remember that article. So that article was in the Journal of Chinese Medicine, episode number 45 on Qiological for anyone who might want to go listen to it. And you can even find a copy of that article on the website, on the show notes page. And I remember sitting down and reading that article. I read it, and then I rarely do this, but I did this with this article. I read it, and then I immediately started reading it again. I mean, I didn't put it down. I read it once, and then I read it a second time, immediately. And then, like, within a couple of days, I read it again. And then a week later, I read it again. I kept coming back to it. I think in some ways, similar to what you were saying, there's something about the way it pulled together the 5 phases in the 6 Qi. And I was like, oh, I kind of get each of these separately because I've always thought of them as 2 different filters that you can look through the world at. But they get mashed together in that article. And they get mashed together with Saam acupuncture in a way that, I mean, I found it just changes how I look at the world, period.
Yeah, for sure. They get mashed together, and I understand each of them so much more clearly. So both of those things.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. How would you say practicing Saam has changed your practice? What have you discovered, or what areas has, I would say, the medicine itself sort of guided you into?
Well, I mean, practice is always changing. So I don't know if like it's Saam itself or just the nature of change and practice change. But maybe concurrently, practicing Saam has given me, I would say, like a more acute lens for understanding patient patterns. So, meaning, I think my pattern differentiation in the clinic room is more clear. And pattern differentiation, often from a Saam perspective, but also sometimes that gives insight into herbs. And sometimes it's just gives me insight into someone's like personality and life and, from like how I can be as a clinician to be most supportive of that person. So just like recognizing kind of the emotional ways that people show up with certain patterns. So for example, someone who is heart excess, for example, they're the people who are like, they love life and they are so excited about helping their neighbor and doing community service and working on their plants and taking care of their pets. And I feel like they just need a little bit of like my calming, cool water, boundary setting energy to help them recognize that that sort of fiery overextension of themselves it's a lovely thing for humanity, but it's also kind of drying out and burning up their resources. So being able to, see it from that sort of perspective and even using that kind of language, you need a little bit of a cool, icy water boundary for all of your outgoing love and interests. Like people really can understand that when they feel these patterns in themselves and you put language to it, that's really helpful for their own understanding.
I suspect people innately kind of get it. When we as the practitioner show up using language. I'm going to say a skillful use of language. It's like we recognize a pattern and maybe it's excess. First of all, we can recognize that in the way that we talk and communicate with them. And then, yes, bringing that opposing energy, which helps to bring balance. People were really cotton to it sometimes. I'm reluctant to say this because it just sounds a little woo-woo. But there are times I have found when language is used skillfully with Saam, because you're kind of bringing up the counterbalancing archetypical energy. It's like, okay, I'm going to do a few needles after this, but the treatment's already started. It can shift things quite dramatically.
Yeah, I agree. And, because often people come in with, if someone has heart excess, there's so much of that fire and love that it's causing pathology or it's causing problems for them. And so the problems are all that they can see or experience. And then there can be self-blame or like feeling like, what's wrong with me? But then if you point out that's also their superpower, all this ability to care and love and, warmth that they have is also what makes them really special. That's a nice thing to hear about yourself. And often people don't get complimented or not even complimented, but don't get recognized for who they are. I think it's just recognizing who someone is in the room and then, balancing their needs. So that's been a really clear thing that Saam has brought me. So I feel like conversations in the clinic room are just more concise and to the point, and nothing is good or bad but you just bring some balance. So that's been great.
You said that it also helps you clarify the herbs that you're going to use.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's not like a one-to-one, correspondence, and it's a back and forth. So my herbal formula diagnosis may also help to clarify Saam treatments and vice versa. And I would say probably the most useful correspondence for that in terms of herbal treatments are in the realm of dermatology. Because I've done a lot of study with Mazen Al-Khafaji, and that's, that is all herbal treatments for dermatology conditions. And I should back up and say, rather than only Saam patterns pointing to herbs, I think Saam patterns can be clarified by the dermatology diagnosis itself. So something that I learned through all the dermatology studies is that like only 8 principal differentiate of dermatology patterns is not enough. You can't just, if someone comes in with a rash, you have to know, is it eczema? Is it psoriasis? Is it seborrheic dermatitis? Is it rosacea? And for each of those conditions, there are certain pathological factors that tend to be predominant. So if someone comes in with a rash and you don't know if you're dealing with psoriasis or eczema, and you only differentiate, you're like, oh, that's red, so it's heat, it's kind of wet, so there's damp, and you just pick some herbs for damp heat, that's most likely not going to resolve the problem, especially something that's chronic and really inflammatory. So, knowing that, for example, psoriasis often is a condition of blood heat and toxin, then for the Saam treatments, my first treatment might be to supplement bladder. And who wants to do a bladder supplementation on their patient's very first acupuncture visit, right?
Oh,
I don't.
it's tough. Some of the points for Saam, I mean, you really have to dig in and go, yep, I'm the dang acupuncturist here.
Yeah,
and
right.
We're going to have at these Jing Wells.
Exactly. And so, I think having that piece of information and really confidence when you see it in the skin, and that's the main thing that this body needs, you just explain it to them and you do it. And, and if the patient sees results or if they feel better on the table, then they are okay with it, even if it's the very first time that you've met them. Versus maybe if I see an eczema pattern and knowing that like dampness is almost always a part of eczema, and so even if even if the skin looks very dry at that point, if there are signs of dampness, like if there's a little swelling or if the location is in certain areas, like the kind of hinge areas that point to more of a damp heat kind of pattern, even if the skin looks dry and there's no otherwise, if you didn't have the training, there's no like overt damp heat signs, I might supplement large intestine as the first treatment.
Which would be a much more gentle treatment.
Which would be, yes. But, so I think that what this kind of overlap of Saam and dermatology study has given me is just this very useful toolkit of a kind of back and forth, more clear differentiation of what my acupuncture treatments need to be, and also then that makes the herbal treatments also go more efficiently. And before having Saam acupuncture, I pretty much only treated dermatology cases with herbs only. But now I tell people, again, depending on the case, of course, but I would say in maybe this case is like 60% of the work will be done by herbs and maybe 20 to 30% by acupuncture and the rest by diet or other lifestyle factors.
Mm-hmm.
So now I use acupuncture on those cases as well.
So it sounds like the differentiation that you've learned from Mazen. It's amazing to study with him. I've only done one weekend with him. He is so clear and precise. This is that. And then he backs up everything with how and why it is that way. In terms of helping to attune and guide your perception for what's toxin, what's heat, those are different. Where's dampness? Like you were just saying, dampness can be so tricky because they may not look damp. The skin might even be dry. But if you know how to look for how dampness can find its way into certain places, and then it becomes an obstruction that doesn't allow fluids to move properly. The issue might look dry, but the root of it is damp. And so to be able to have that discernment is so critical for any diagnosis, right? If you're doing herbs, and especially for Saam, because what I found with Saam, and this is fascinating to me, because of the way the organs are paired together, we're actually looking at a model for proper physiology of the organism, right? There's a part of the body that's all about cold water. There's a part of the body that's about cool dryness, right? We know we're ecosystems, and each of the 6 chi is somewhat representative of that. And if you can pair it up correctly, it's ridiculous what the body is capable of doing in service of rebalancing it, recalibrating itself.
Yeah, I like what you say about it's ridiculous what the body is capable of doing. It really is. I mean, it's comical sometimes.
Well, this is just something that recently has come to mind for me. It's funny. The longer I practice, the stupider I feel. Because there's times something comes to mind. It's like, well, why didn't I notice that before? All right, I've been at it long enough. How come it takes till now to notice it? But one of the things that I've found is because we're treating people who are, I'm going to use air quotes here, ill, or they come to us with, again, air quotes, a problem. And the agreement of medicine is we're going to help you with your problem. We get very, very good, and I think we're trained as well to focus on pathology. And it's helpful. You have to understand the pathology, for sure. But I think, at least for me, I have overlooked what I'm going to call proper physiological function. And the proper physiological function of the different organs and channels, I think, is what actually creates the possibility of healing if we can bring those into play. And the really interesting thing about the way the Saam system divvies up the paired organs, it really puts opposites together.
Yeah, I think that your statement of the more you practice, the more stupid you feel. I mean, you could say that in that sort of self-deprecating way, but I think it's that the more we practice, the simpler things can stand out. And I think it's easier to understand the important aspects through the mess of pathology. And sometimes, things then just seem so simple that you're like, well, I feel dumb for not having seen that for the last 10 years, but I think you just have a more clear discernment.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, a practice management software and EMR that's here to make clinical life a little easier. Running a health and wellness practice means managing a lot of moving parts. That's why I love how Jane helps to bring a bit of calm to the busy day by allowing me to set a schedule that works for my business. I can customize treatment types and times, locations, and staff availability to keep everybody organized and my clinic running smoothly. Need to send intake forms or appointment reminders? Jane can automate those too, helping patients to show up prepared and on time. And when it's time to pay, it's all taken care of. No extra card swipes or billing cleanup later. I especially like that with the welcome email my patients receive, they can fill out the intake, consent, and disclosure forms. It's easy for the patient, and it all goes right into their digital file. If you're looking for software that cares as much about the business side of your clinic as you care about your patients, head to jane.app/demo to learn more. And if you're ready to dive in, use the code Qiological for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Yes, I would not disagree with that. In fact, you stated really well that there is a simplicity that can emerge over time. It's so simple, right? There's a part of me that's smacking my forehead and going, how could I not have seen that before?
Yeah. And I think that's the thing about Saam too, is it's so simple, right? It's these 4 points. It's like, you tonify the mother, those 4 points, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, you're tonifying the mother and you're turning off the control. That's it.
Right. Yeah. And it's so simple. And it's okay. That's a nice little, 5-element abstraction. That's a nice idea in theory, but it actually works in practice as long as you understand what, those patterns and how things show up. So it's so simple. And I don't know, how come we didn't see those before? How come it took that monk, having to meditate in a cave for so long to see that? So it's a little silly that like we couldn't have put that together. But isn't it great that we have the insight now?
We have the insight. Sometimes I wonder, look, Chinese medicine, East Asian medicine, whatever we call it, it's been around for so long. I'm sure other people have had similar ideas over the course of time. It happens that in the Saam tradition, it kind of hones back to a ascetic monk who was meditating. But I suspect there's people all along that have paused and taken a look and gone, wait a minute. The heart is Shaoyin and its elemental is fire. That's like super hot. And the urinary bladder, that's Taiyang. That's cold. Oh, and it's water. Oh, so we have cold water counterbalancing, the hotness of the heart. I'm sure other people have seen it over time. It's just that we never heard from them.
Yeah. So there's a simplicity to, I think, practicing for a while and then, having seen a lot of the same things for a long time that you couldn't make sense of or like there was too much noise and you didn't know how to distill the pure sound from the noise.
Yeah. It gets simpler over time. That's one way of knowing maybe that we're making progress. When I first got out of acupuncture school, the school I went to, we did acupuncture and herbs simultaneously. So we got a pretty good training in it. And I remember having a raw herb pharmacy because I was like super into it. I might have had 80 herbs or something in my first clinic. And the jar is labeled, the whole bit. It was cool. It was fun. And I remember thinking to myself at that point, well, I got 80 herbs now, but man, when I get good at this stuff, I'll probably have 300. And in these days, I think I've got 50. I don't use raw herbs. I use granules. But I found over time, I use fewer herbs, not more herbs.
Uh-huh. And do you think that has to do with, just being more efficient or like understanding more about how the herbs work or just preferences?
I think perhaps in part preference and bias. I'm a human. It's hard to get away from that. But I also think the other piece is what we're talking about here, that in time, there's a kind of simplicity or a kind of relationship that I've built with different herbs. So like Danshan, for example. It's like, hey, Danshan's my good buddy. I can use Danshan in lots of places. So I don't need a bunch of cooling, moving, blood movers. I mean, I've got a few, but like Danshan is my pal. It works really well for a lot of things. So I think it is something about that simplicity. Yeah.
Right. That's Sutang in one herb, right?
That's what they say.
Yeah. Well, maybe also because over time, and I've heard you say this on podcasts, is that your population, right? It's not like you're treating all the different weird conditions. So your population, you do great with the 50 herbs.
Yeah. So I want to come back to the diagnosis and dermatology and using acupuncture in this case. One of the things I love about Saam, again, I think it's my herbal background. It reminds me so much of herbs.
Right. Yeah. I think that's really what spoke to me as well.
I want to hear more about treating dermatological conditions using Saam.
All right. So, first of all, again, goes back to having enough dermatology training to be able to diagnose. I think that for me, that has been really crucial. You got to know what a lesion is. Is it toxin? Is it damp? Does it have to do with the stomach? Or is it more of a liver issue? Those things will help to hone in on a Saam diagnosis. But I was thinking about our conversation and thinking so for someone who doesn't have that sort of specialized dermatology training, how could they apply some of these ideas? How could they be more precise with their usage of Saam? And I would say one is if the patient has a diagnosis, like from a dermatologist, you go with that. I think that maybe 50% of the time, oh no, I'm going to say maybe 70% of the time is going to be correct. There's people have lots of incorrect diagnoses. But if you don't have any other experience or information to go on, then if they have a diagnosis, then that's what you got to go with.
And how would you use that in the clinic? Because so often people do come in with a Western medicine diagnosis, but it doesn't really help us in what we do. How is a dermatological diagnosis useful from our perspective?
Yes. So some of the common dermatology conditions, so for example, psoriasis, right? Psoriasis is a condition that has a lot of blood heat. It has dryness, it has wind, and sometimes there's damp heat and toxin. So if they have that diagnosis, then you would think about, and then you would also use your differential diagnosis patterns to see if you see blood heat and dryness on the skin, then, I would supplement bladder. And then if someone, if they are very itchy, for example, although psoriasis isn't a crazy itchy condition, but if there's like a lot of flaking and scales and itch, or if the condition is more in the upper part of the body, then you might think, okay, there's blood heat and there's wind. So maybe one of your other treatments could be to supplement small intestine. And then if someone is diagnosed with eczema, there is always heat. There's almost always dampness. Sometimes there's toxin. And so then what would that kind of treatment be in Saam? If you want to deal with damp heat, that's a large intestine supplementation, right? If there's toxin, there's also large intestine supplementation, or maybe draining spleen or partial draining of spleen. If someone has eczema and they are weeping, like the skin is weeping, and there's like yellow fluid coming out, damp heat, toxin.
That's a pretty clear signal, isn't it?
Right. So for those people, I have supplemented large intestine with partial draining of the spleen if it's like that acute sort of damp heat. If someone has been diagnosed with hives, urticaria,
which is a pretty common condition. That tends to roll around my clinic on a regular basis.
Yes. And I would say for like acute urticaria, it's just come on, or they've been dealing it with a few days. Often it's self-limiting, it goes away, and you just differentiate according to your normal stuff. And I don't think anything specialized has to go with it. But I've seen people with chronic urticaria, someone with pretty regular hives presenting for 20 years or for, 6 months daily. Then knowing that there is blood heat that goes with this, and that often you have to ask about the triggers for urticaria. So some people, it may be induced by eating. For some people, it might be something called pressure urticaria, where like if they're holding a bag, or like holding a purse on their forearm, when the purse comes off, the purse straps, that's where the hives come on. So, and then you also look at the location. of the hives presenting. So I'm thinking of my last urticaria patient who really showed, I mean, it was like she came in and her eyes were swollen and her temples had this big patch and like her lateral body was all broken out.
Clearly Xiaoyang.
Yes. Well, and also these were convex lesions. So where would you go with that?
I would probably drain their gallbladder.
Yeah. So supplemented pericardium. And then I think probably next time I had also done a partial gallbladder drain. So that made a huge difference for her, along with giving herbs for blood heat because the lesions were bright red.
Now, you could have also done pericardium and to get rid of some of that heat, done bladder on the other side. Yeah. Mix together the...
Yeah, but I'm pretty careful. I'm kind of a minimalist. I have been a good abider of Toby's lessons of trying to sort through, trying to understand what exactly works first before getting all fancy. So I think that for her, I had already done bladder. I had already supplemented bladder previously, and it hadn't made much of a difference. But because urticaria is often that sort of acute issue, there's so much blood heat involved. So I was sure that supplementing bladder would help because that had helped in some other urticaria cases. But in this case, it did not. And for her, it really was like, her morphology, like sort of dry skin, bigger rib cage, full thiners. And so supplementing stomach super helped. Then when she came in this time with a very obvious distribution on the gallbladder regions and just looking at the convex lesions, supplementing pericardium helped. So I feel like urticaria is one of those things where even if you don't know the diagnosis, the physical patterns can really point you to the Saam treatments.
Yes. I really appreciate your, I'm going to call it stick-to-itiveness with really looking to dial in what is causing this. Because it's easy to want to throw the kitchen sink. Well, I mean, maybe not the whole kitchen sink, but throw a few pins in the direction of a few things that might be helpful. But it can be tricky. And more is definitely, in certain cases, better, but in many cases not. And in cases where it's not better, in particular, is where it's actually not helpful. You have a really good idea about what it might be, but you're wrong. If you go with two different treatment strategies at the same time, you won't know which one worked if one of them worked. And so I love your example here. It's like, oh yeah, that looked hot. I'm going to use bladder to cool it. And you get a big like, meh, so what? That's really important information.
It is. Yeah. And, I've tried to practice that way since studying with Toby so long ago. I'm not always successful because sometimes you're like, let me add in something else. Let me just try to make it even better. But I don't know. Do you know the Chinese saying, 画蛇添足? Do you?
花式天主, no.
画蛇. My mother tongue is Sichuanese, so I really am terrible with the Mandarin, whether there's an H in there or not. But the translation is adding legs on a snake.
Oh, yeah.
And the
Yes.
story, do you know the parable where like there was a competition, there was like a drawing competition.
Yeah, like don't add something that doesn't belong.
That's right. Yeah. There was like a drawing competition and some guy finished first. He drew a very beautiful snake. And then he was like, oh, I have time. I'm going to add some really cool legs to this snake. So don't do that.
Don't do that. Know what's enough. Yeah, I find that this is, because it's two things at the same time. On one hand, looking for that simplicity, looking for that very clear diagnosis. And there's also that part of us that is creative, that sometimes because of the experience we have, it's like, oh, I see this and here's how they're connected. And we want to help. And if we think it can help, I mean, who doesn't experiment in their clinic all the time? I mean, that's what we do with every treatment.
That's what we're doing all day long.
All day long.
Yep.
So it really is a matter of, on one hand, trying to keep it simple and direct, and, also looking for that little thing you could add that might make that snake better, but not paint legs on it.
Right. Maybe you just color it in or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So the urticaria that's a great thing to treat with Saam. And then the other condition that I've seen a lot of recently, which I'm like, God, I got to tell Michael about this, is rosacea. So rosacea is something that affects women of my population, mostly. It's like, people in their 40s and 50s or a little older, women more than men. For most of these inflammatory skin conditions, it affects women more than men. And so there's, redness on the face. Often it's distributed like forehead, nose, chin, and cheeks. So they call it sign of the cross. And what I found, just by sort of looking at the lesions and distribution, is that it's a great Saam treatment pattern because from an herbal understanding, rosacea not almost always, often corresponds with some sort of GI pattern. So like stomach heat, a damp heat or a toxin in the stomach. And there's a blood stagnation pattern to rosacea. So, and often there's like a stomach or lung heat. That's the herbal pattern. So the herbs that you're using might be like sangbai pi, pipaye, digu pi, that kind of thing. And so with Saam, we have this really great stomach-lung axis. And if you look at the distribution, often you'll see patches like on the cheek, right on the stomach meridian, or paranasal, sort of lung regions. And often these are women who are not only women, but, people who are like morphology wise, they really fit that lung excess. There's like a full thenar to it. There's like, GERD or reflux or kind of a gross taste in the mouth. Maybe they have constipation. And so supplementing stomach makes a big difference for rosacea. So probably one could arrive at that conclusion without even knowing the kind of herbal rosacea diagnosis patterns, but knowing that rosacea is a pattern with blood stagnation would be super helpful because then you do some stomach supplementation and then you supplement small intestine. And that mix really helps with that condition.
It's fun, isn't it?
Yeah, it is really fun.
Fun noticing this stuff.
And it's fun having clarity and information, like correct information.
It's more than fun having clarity. It's a relief having clarity.
Totally. Yeah. And for whatever reason, maybe because of my very own sensitive skin and my history of just suffering through skin issues that people really couldn't, no one could really help with. I had to figure it out for myself. I care so much about these dermatology patients. And so, yes, at the point of sort of unlocking and actually doing something that's helpful, that then they start to improve, it's such a relief. That's what we do clinic for.
Are you a California licensed acupuncturist who accepts insurance or wants to? Are you satisfied with your current reimbursements? You could be earning more. With the right support, joining top insurance networks such as Cigna is simple. AcuCare was started 30 years ago by acupuncturists for acupuncturists. AcuCare has already negotiated top reimbursement rates. With AcuCare, you'll spend more time with your patients and less time battling insurance paperwork. What do their members say? Here are a few words from Tara Diaz, LAC. Thanks to AcuCare, I am now successfully in network with several major insurance providers, which has significantly expanded my patient base and improved my practice's financial stability. Visit acucare.com and let them help you get in network with Cigna and other companies. Get paid what you deserve. Visit acucare.com and save $100 on your credentialing application fee. Use the code PROSPER. That code again, PROSPER. Visit acucare.com to get higher reimbursement rates and a credentialing company you can trust. Yes, it's exactly what we do clinic for. It's worth getting out of bed in the morning to go to work.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
What about acne? Acne is such a big one, especially for kids.
Acne is a big one. Yeah.
And that Accutane stuff is just poison. It breaks my heart when people want to take that stuff.
Yeah. You could say that about a lot of pharmaceuticals, but like, what is their option? So I totally understand and I sympathize with people going that route. So you really have to understand the different patterns of acne. And this is where like visual examination of lesions can be so important because you could imagine like a 15-year-old boy. What does his acne look like? Most likely there's many whiteheads, forehead, cheeks, chin, and the whiteheads the acne pops up really quickly. So sort of they come on and they resolve both pretty quickly. The whiteheads, he may be able to squeeze it out pretty easily, so they're superficial, right? And he may have very greasy skin and like greasy hair. I have a patient right now who's sort of in this profile, except for his acne is actually slightly different. But just lots of, those androgens, man, right? The teenage boy androgens, like there's lots of grease happening for the sebaceous glands. So that pattern, and often these are like sort of thin-ish kids, not always, but thinnish kids. And so that may be a stomach excess pattern, right? That is a damp on the outside and not too damp on the inside. But then you might see acne in a 30-year-old woman, and it has to do with it's worse around the period. They're deeper, more cystic nodules. There may be like a purplish hue around the lesions, and their skin is actually dry, perhaps, right? Like they have acne, which is an oil imbalance in that skin region, but overall skin dryness is also present. So supplementing lung in that case would not be a good idea. And in fact, maybe because of the deeper nodular aspect, I would tend to think of that as an interior dampness. And if they have the dry skin, maybe they need stomach supplementation. So, this is a case of when you know the diagnosis, you still have to think.
Of course. Yes. Well, this is one of the things that I find very compelling about the diagnostics that go with Saam. It's a set of principles that you can plug all kinds of information into, right? We're just talking here about with acne, and you're talking about the young man in particular, where it's like a lung stomach, right? These are counterbalanced organs in Saam, and they each have their properties. If you understand again, we're back to proper physiology. If you understand the proper physiology of something, then you also can more clearly see when it's diseased or imbalanced, and then more clearly see, oh, well, here's the solution to it. And it's so fascinating to me, and I love this conversation with you, where you're taking some wonderful things that you've learned from Mazen and being able to differentiate all the basic stuff that you need to differentiate in Chinese medicine, period. And then you can bring it into Saam with its particular rubrics, and it just slides right in. You can take what you already know, apply it, and now you can see even more how to use acupuncture for the body to correct itself.
And I feel like, just because all clinical conversations have to do with both successes and failures, I feel like something to share, just because I just talked about two conditions, acne and rosacea, that can do well with a lung and stomach axis sort of view and treatments. I would be very careful with using that axis for eczema patients, because I've made so many mistakes and now I know. Because what we were saying before, dryness can be so deceptive. Dryness on the skin, and patients will feel dry. And I've had so many patients say, oh, my skin is so dry, it feels like it's cracked. Lotion won't stay on me. Lotion doesn't do anything. So then my first go-to would be, yeah, well, that's dry skin. So we got to moisten the skin. And so let's supplement stomach. But what is that dryness coming from? Often there's some sort of dampness or heat or stagnation or something else that is blocking the fluids or drying up fluids, and that's why it's dry. So to just move fluids to the skin with supplementing stomach. I had one patient who after I supplemented stomach, she went home and then she called me and she said, I feel like I have fluid in my ears. And this used to happen to me when I used to go swimming, but I haven't been swimming. And I came home and I have fluid in my ears. And, and I was like, I've moved fluid in the wrong way. So I've done that. And there was someone else. And then of course I did not want to supplement lung on her. I mean, that seemed like that would be a terrible idea. So actually for her, I had her come in right away and I drained spleen. I think I did a partial spleen drain and a partial bladder supplementation, and that calmed things down. But you can also really mess people up, as we all know from practicing Saam.
Well, it's true with herbs. You can mess people up. Yeah, I think because of those 4 needles and the way they work and the way, if you believe in the 5 phases and 6 chi, if you really think they're real, and I suspect they are, because when you start mucking with them using needles, you can get some pretty traumatic results, right? The stuff has firepower. And it's something I've told people, and I have to remind myself actually, which is if something is powerful enough to heal, it's also powerful enough to cause problems if applied incorrectly. This whole idea that acupuncture can only be harmonizing and not cause imbalances, I think it's patently ridiculous unless you're doing some kind of treatment that is so phenomenally balanced, you're probably not getting much movement at all. The thing about Saam is it's an incredibly imbalancing treatment.
Yes. I think it depends on the body and where the body starts. I don't know. I feel like if the differentials between the different poles aren't that great, then the treatment itself doesn't have to be an incredibly imbalancing effect on the body. I don't know, because there are some treatments that you do that are like, even with Saam, right? It's okay.
Yeah, I figure with those, I just missed it. I figure I just missed it. I just didn't hit the right thing.
Yeah. But I agree with what you're saying, Michael. It's just that I feel like everything has a caveat. So I'm just arguing with you a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think it's worth talking about. And you just bring up a really interesting point that if there's a big imbalance, maybe an incorrect treatment would have a much stronger effect. Whereas if the body is already mostly humming along in a fairly harmonized way, you're probably not going to knock it off. But if things are wobbly in the first place, it can get bad.
Yeah, if things are really wobbly and you're like not fixing the exact leg that needs to be fixed, then you're going to mess them up.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah. And I think that's probably that's the case in clinic that, if someone is really, really suffering, when they make 30% improvement, they really notice, right? Versus if someone is mostly doing okay, if they improve 30%, they're not going to be able to tell you.
They may not even have 30% to improve. They're mostly okay.
Right. Yeah. Or if they improve 30% of their 10% remaining, then it's only a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. And you were saying something about whether, the 5 elements and the 6 chi are real or not. And you suspect yes. That's a question that I think about every day in clinic. And I even say it out loud sometimes to my patients. I'm like, I just explained this to you, and maybe it's real, or maybe it's just metaphor, or maybe it's both. I don't know. But, this is how I look at it that makes sense. And they're like, oh, yeah, it makes sense to me too. Usually, or sometimes they say it doesn't make sense. And I'm like, it's okay.
Yeah. I try not to talk about the 5 phases or the 6 chi in clinic. I try to leave that out of the conversation. What I do bring in is whatever people have that they're suffering with, where that's bothersome to them. And I translate it into my own sense of, oh, it's this element and this chi. And then I'll talk to them about that. I won't talk to them about like, oh yeah, we have this metal excess. I don't talk to them about that. But I'll talk to them about their issue with resources. And because that's what they're talking to me about, they're like, oh yeah, they're totally on board with it. I don't even have to explain it because I'm just speaking their language back to them.
Right. I feel like we're probably doing the same thing. It's not like I'm going deep into the philosophy of, 5 phases and 6 chi. But, I might explain to someone what, having what this sort of particular kind of metal excess for them means. So I think we're saying the same thing. And I think, you had asked me a question earlier about how has practicing Saam changed my practice. And something that I've realized recently is that I feel like I'm able to use the language of Chinese medicine or Asian medicine more, and with like less apology in clinic. For a long time, my undergrad was a biology background, and I really wanted to speak the language of science to my patients. I practice in Durham, North Carolina. It's the city of medicine. Like Duke is down the road. We see a lot of MDs and nurses in our clinic. And And for a long time, I just wanted to talk about sort of the biomedical understanding of acupuncture. I felt that was what people wanted to hear. And now I recognize that like that is, a thing and there's research and I'm happy for people doing acupuncture biomedical research. But I talk about what lung excess means and why they're having trouble like swallowing food and maybe some of the difficulty that they have like getting rid of their stuff in the attic and how we think about, how it would be useful for them to work on letting go, not only in their constipation, but also in maybe just not holding on so tightly to certain relationships or material goods. And I think there's definitely more woo than I used to speak in clinic, but I don't feel apologetic for it. And it feels like the right kind of language to be using. And it really, I think it's meaningful for my patients.
Yeah. I'm back to what you said earlier about practice long enough, see enough different things, talk to enough different people. There's a simplicity that emerges. And in hearing you describe how you're talking to your patients these days, there's a way that you can see into what it means to have a lung excess, how that shows up in a person's life, how that matches with what they're presenting to you. And so you can talk to them about lung excess in a way that is not at all theoretical. It's actually connecting with important touch points in their life. It's actually very, very simple once you can see those patterns and once you can see those relationships. And once those relationships are clear in your own mind, it's simple to have the conversation with the patient and you don't need to be sciencey anymore.
Right. Yeah. The science is cool. And I use science talk for maybe with nutrition or thinking about someone's heart disease history or something like that. But really for like acupuncture clinic, my language has changed. And I feel like I also have a deeper connection with a lot of my patients in terms of their, I don't know, like emotional or just like energetic needs.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you're speaking their language.
Right. Specific to their body.
Specific to their body, you're using a common parlance, so to speak, and you're not getting all sciencey and techy. I was looking at a MRI report for a family member recently, and, I have some medical terminology in my background, but when I looked at that report, I had no idea what they were talking about. I mean, I had to sit down and translate the whole thing. It was just so far away from saying there's a bit of inflammation and maybe a touch of arthritis and a little bit of fluid accumulation. It's basically what it said, right? And I think one of the great benefits that we bring people is we can talk with them about medical sorts of things, health sorts of things, in a very common language that people feel connected to. It's, oh, you get me. Not just that you get my problem, but you get me. It's good to be understood and it's good to be seen. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And again, from the practitioner side, when we can see clearly what might be going on for somebody. And again, I really appreciate all your examples from what you've learned from Mazen in terms of dermatology and what that means from the point of view of physiology, because all of these are very useful markers that we can then take, better understand where things are not working well, and then skillfully intervene.
Yeah.
Wash, rinse, repeat.
Yeah. And like maybe do some mending in there.
Yeah, well, that's great. Anything else that you would like to share with our listeners before we wind this down for today?
Is there anything else? Well, in your questionnaire or in your like prep sheet for the podcast, you had asked for like one or two sentences of clinical wisdom or clinical guidance or something.
Oh, yeah, distilled. Yeah, we put that on the website. little
Yeah.
distilled clinical experience.
Yeah. Well, I had to close that Google Doc and really think about that for a while because I was like, God, 1 or 2 sentences, it's really not adding any legs to the snake. You have to be very concise about this. And I think I wrote something like, be the practitioner that you want to see. And I really, that's what I hope for myself in terms of my practice. And I think that most people in our profession are, striving to do well. And I think that if our patients need so much care, the state of healthcare currently, like we don't need to get into how awful it is. But people feel not seen and not heard or like just there's just not enough time given to clearly understand these complex systems that we are. And I would I always just think like for my patients, if I were them, what kind of care would I want? And I think that if we just provide the kind of care, I guess it's our version of the golden rule, but if we provide the kind of care that we would want for ourselves, then we would be doing good work. So I'm in a group practice and there are a couple of practitioners who have 20 years more experience than I do. I've been in practice for 20 years and then we're just bringing on some new practitioners. And I really want to promote this idea of like Chinese medicine or Asian medicine is an excellent medicine. And that the help that we can provide people is like genuine and human and nuanced and excellent. And so that's my little motto, going into clinic every day. And I hope that for our profession, that's how it's done.
It is indeed helpful to have something that guides us, something really solid, a touchstone, because you can get pretty wacky in there in clinics sometimes. And having some kind of touchstone is really helpful for when you lose your footing.
So that's it.
That's wonderful. Well, Fang, I appreciate your time today, and I'm going to go back and review my Mazen notes because it's going to help me with my Saam diagnosis, I think in all kinds of other ways. I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes.
Yeah. And, I had reached out to you and Philip Sugar.
Mm-hmm.
I always want to call him Sugar, about maybe doing a little workshop or something. I feel like as I keep collecting more ideas and as things bear out in clinic, I think that would probably be useful for people. So
that would be wonderful. This is how the medicine grows, right? We learn something and then we do a show and tell with our friends.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Until next time then.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Well, that wraps it up with Fang for today. What stayed with me was her quiet precision, how she brings together the clarity of Saam acupuncture with the nuance of dermatology. It's not about more theory or more technique, but about observing, really seeing what's there, listening closely, and trusting what the body is showing you. I appreciated how she spoke about the skin not as a surface to be treated, but more as a reflection of inner dialogue, how dryness, dampness, and heat are expressions of deeper physiological and emotional tone. Her stories reminded me that good practice isn't about dazzling complexity. It's about discernment, restraint, and language that helps the patients to feel seen. And that line, be the practitioner you want to see, that one's worth sitting with for a bit. It captures something essential about the kind of medicine many of us aspire to, medicine that's honest, attentive, and human. If there's one thing I take away from today, it's that simplicity, when rooted in understanding, it can be profound. I'm reminded again that simplicity, it doesn't mean easy, nor is it about ignoring complicated issues. It's a way of engaging with a discernment that allows you to track what's important.